Living a longer and better quality life is something that we all want. And what if I told you that there was a diet that is claiming that you can live longer and healthier based on the lifestyles of individuals that consistently live to 90 or even 100 years old? Well, there is, and it's called the Bluezones diet. And it's flipping the diet and nutrition industry on its head and make the entire world stop and pay attention to the way that we eat and live. My name is Dr. Mark with a PhD in human nutrition. And today I'm going to review the Bluezones diet, what it is, how to do it, who it's for, and ultimately give you my expert opinion on if you should be eating this way. Stay until the end for that. First of all, what is the Bluezones diet? Dan Bittner, a National Geographic explorer and author, went on a quest to find the secrets of longevity and found something really surprising. There were several areas throughout the world where people were consistently living into their late 90s and into their hundreds in good health. These areas were Icaria, Greece, Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Loma Linda, California, and the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, which he named the collective of all these places the Bluezones. After researching everything from the lifestyle, nutrition, and mindset for these people living in the Bluezones, Dan started noticing some staggering similarities between all the Bluezones that led to increased lifespan. And not only just that, but the ability to live in good health up until death. These dietary and lifestyle similarities ultimately became the Bluezones diet. Let's talk about the nutritional guidelines of the Bluezones diet. So here are some of the requirements or rules. Eat a 95% up to 100% plant-based diet. Eat only whole or unprocessed foods. Eat half a cup to 1 cup of beans per day. Drink mostly water, tea, coffee, or wine in moderation. Snack on 1 to 2 handfuls of nuts per day. And decrease sugar intake to around 28 grams per day. Now we're gonna go more in depth on some of those nutritional guidelines in just a second, but there's a few things that I wanna point off right off the bat. Number one is these recommendations are obviously not individualized. Although there are individual portion sizes for a few specific foods within the diet, it doesn't pay too much attention to how all of these add together to create the entire diet, which can be problematic for the individual. And there's definitely no attention being paid to calories, macronutrients, or food labels. And based on my research, this is almost being touted as a badge of honor from the author. But it's also important to point out that number two, living a longer and healthier life in the Bluezones is without a doubt diet related, but there's also this lifestyle component that we can't ignore, which is also why Bittner details the lifestyle components of this way of life. Number one, move naturally. In the Bluezones, people don't go to the gym to pump iron. Instead, they naturally move more throughout their day by doing gardening or doing labor, and their lifestyle requires them to be outside and constantly active. Number two, we have purpose. People in the Bluezones all have a sense of purpose or a reason they wake up in the morning. Bittner argues that knowing your sense of purpose alone is worth up to 7 years of extra life expectancy. Number three, downshift. For those of us in a modern society, feeling stressed and overwhelmed seems to be the norm, and chronic stress has been proven to lead to health problems down the road. People in the Bluezones are less stressed than the average person. This comes back to their lifestyle and cultural beliefs, but also they actively have routines from prayer, daily naps, and regular time with loved ones that help reduce overall stress. Number four, there's belong. In all the Bluezone populations, individuals all belong to some type of faith-based community, giving them some sense of belonging, which Bittner argues alone can add 4 to 14 years of life expectancy. Number five, loved ones first. For the Bluezone regions, family is everything. Elders are taken care of by the family in their older age. Individuals commit to one life partner, and they invest time and love into their children. This family-oriented philosophy adds to their sense of belonging and purpose and has been shown to increase life expectancy. And our last one here, finally, the tenet of the right tribe. All Bluezone individuals were born into a culture and environment that supports this age-defying lifestyle, making adherence to the nutritional guidelines and lifestyle tenets not only easy, but just a normal way of life. So that's just a brief overview of the lifestyle factors that go into the Bluezone diet, or at least these populations. But now let's talk about the diet itself, which is picking up massive popularity around the world, and how to implement it. I did previously mention the general guidelines of the Bluezones diet, but now let's take a closer look of how this fits into day-to-day nutrition. If we were to break down the macronutrient percentages of the Bluezones diet, 65% of your calories would come from carbohydrates, roughly 20% would come from dietary fat, and roughly 15% would come from dietary protein, which for the most part is a higher carbohydrate, lower protein, lower fat diet. To achieve this, first, the Bluezones diet requires you to eat number one, 95 to 100% plant-based. People in the Bluezones eat very little meat or animal-based products. limiting fish and meat to around 3 ounces 3 times per week, eggs to 3 eggs per week or none at all, and no milk outside of goat's milk, which they use to ferment to make cheese, yogurt, and sour milk. Instead, people in the blue zones grow and consume their own produce, and oils are derived from plants like olives. Self-sustaining food is the biggest component of the blue zone diet and blue zone recipes. If you or your client were to implement this, you'd want to focus mainly on trying to incorporate more fresh fruits and vegetables, root vegetables like sweet potato, nuts and seeds, beans and legumes, plant-based oils, and some bread, particularly sourdough bread. And for those of us that do eat a lot of meat, carnivore dieters look away. I can't imagine you clicked on this video. This could be a difficult transition. However, eating plant-based is not impossible. There are tons of recipes and resources to make this transition a bit easier. Not to mention, in the blue zone diet, animal products are not off limits. You can still have some meat and fish if they are under those 3-ounce limit. Eating plant-based is the largest component of the blue zones diet, but it doesn't stop there. You also need to eat number 2, whole and unprocessed foods. In the blue zones, people aren't eating Pringles and Oreos. They are eating food straight from the source. There are no extras or enhancements like in flour, and they do not subtract important elements of the food like removing egg yolk from the actual egg. If they were to eat breads and oil, it's going to be sourdough, which is fermented, and olive oil, and fermented cheese and yogurt. To implement something similar in your own life, you're going to look to add in more unprocessed food, preparing most of your meals at home through the process of cooking, fermenting, and pickling. Now, Bittner does acknowledge that most of us don't have an oil press at home, but the emphasis is on choosing flour and oils and other food products that use mostly whole and natural ingredients with little to no processing. The next parameter we have in the diet to focus on is number 3, eating at least half a cup of beans per day. Beans are king, and we're talking about legumes of all sorts. Really, any bean that you can think of is going to be a staple in blue zone diets as well as blue zone recipes. Beans are going to be the primary protein source and the main staple of many of these blue zone meals. Beans are high in fiber and complex carbs, which means they're a good energy source as well as they keep you regular. Not only that, beans are inexpensive, easy to access, and can be added to virtually any meal. The next dietary parameter is number 4, snacking on nuts. The recommendation is to snack on 1 to 2 handfuls of nuts per day. The optimal mix would be a variety of nuts. We're talking a mixture of almonds and cashews and peanuts, which are going to supply different healthy fats as well as micronutrients. The key here is to limit your portions to around 1 to 2 handfuls per day. This is one of the food choices that could really bump up calories if you're trying to follow a diet like this. And remember, this is the blue zones diet, so you're not going to go into your grocery store and buy a bunch of barbecue flavored cashew. Instead, when following this diet, you're going to be buying nuts and seeds that are mainly unprocessed and unflavored and unsalted, so that you're following that unprocessed guideline. Next up, we have reducing sugar. As I mentioned before, in the blue zones diet, you're trying to limit your sugar to less than 28 grams of sugar per day. The intent is to reduce sugar as much as possible, most of it coming from fruit only. The recommendation is, if you're going to indulge in a sweet treat, save it for a special occasion like a holiday or a birthday. And lastly, we have liquids, which means only drinking water, tea, coffee, and some wine. As you can imagine, at this point in our blue zones diet coverage, Diet Coke in the middle of the day to prevent that midday crash is not on the menu. Instead, when following this diet, you're going to be mainly drinking water, black coffee, and tea. There's absolutely no soda, even if it's sugar-free, and definitely no sugary Starbucks drinks. You can, however, and it is highly encouraged, drink around 1 to 3 glasses of red wine per day. Although the mechanism isn't completely known, Bittner's research does show that drinking a small glass of red wine every day increases life expectancy due to the increase in tannins and antioxidants. And people in the blue zones tend to pair that wine not with a cheese board, but with social interaction, which adds to that sense of community and belonging. So those are the dietary guidelines around the blue zones diet, so you or your clients can start following eating this way. But now let's talk about the pros and the cons of this dietary approach, as well as give you my expert opinion. First, the pros. I don't know about you, but as a busy professional with a young family and a career and a lot of stress, there are some appealing aspects of the blue zones diet, especially the lifestyle factors, slowing down, putting family first, and the emphasis on longevity and overall health. These are appealing. Many of the dietary changes that the blue zones diet recommends and prescribes will lead to reduced chronic disease as well as improved overall health, which is comforting as we age. The research is pretty clear that avoiding processed foods and limiting added sugar, reducing stress, and overall moving more is going to improve your health, and there's no getting around that. But there is a catch. You do have to stick with it, which leads me to some of the cons or drawbacks of the Bluezones diet. If you think about the Bluezones diet here, there's nothing really revolutionary. Eat more whole, unprocessed foods, reduce stress. Obesity rates continue to rise, as well as the profits from fast food companies or super processed foods continue to increase, despite having all of this information. Most people are busy and on the go and having to prepare all of their meals from scratch, which leads me to my first con for most individuals, which is this way of eating may not be sustainable. Most people are busy and constantly on the go, so we're having to prepare all of their meals from scratch with no processed ingredients could be a recipe for disaster right off the bat. While I do understand that a busy lifestyle is most likely the culprit for a lot of these problems, it's an inescapable reality for most people. Not to mention some of the strict guidelines around little to no sugar as well as little to no meat might be too much of a deviation from the standard westernized diet. The second con comes from an aspect of the actual dietary recommendations themselves, which in my opinion is not enough protein. In the Bluezones diet, it's estimated that protein is going to account for around 15% of total calories, which for starters can be an issue if we don't have a sense of the total amount of calories being consumed, which means 15% of protein on a whole food diet could be quite below the RDA or recommended dietary allowance of 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein per day. Protein is an essential part of the human diet, and since many don't have the goal of just living longer, but to live an active life with muscle that protects autonomy and risk against falls, so there may need to be more protein. So for anyone starting this diet, I would just put a larger emphasis on protein, even if those are plant-based sources, erring on the higher end of the acceptable macronutrient distribution range, which is between 10 and 35% of calories. But that might be easier said than done with limited meat options, as well as eating mostly nuts, seeds, and beans. This doesn't seem to impact the traditional populations following this diet, but for anyone else trying to follow this diet that might have body composition goals like weight loss, there probably is going to be a requirement for more protein for it to be successful. Thirdly, and this is very common in diets that emphasize diet quality, like the Mediterranean diet, there isn't a huge stress over portion sizes or individualization, which makes sense given this diet was based on the study of populations, not individuals. But if you want to find a way of eating that works for you, you're going to have to pay attention to what your body needs as an individual and probably break a few rules that may not be necessary anyway. Lastly, the Bluezones diet in itself is not enough. While the diet is a start and you would see some health benefits to eating this way alone, without the lifestyle changes, you're not going to see the full impact of this approach. And while I personally don't have any data to back this up, I do suspect that the biggest benefit to this style of life is going to come down to the lifestyle factors and cultural philosophies of the Bluezones. Keeping stress low, limiting screen time, moving consistently throughout the day, and spending time with your loved ones has a huge impact on your overall health and well-being. So I'm not entirely convinced that you have to cut out salted almonds or diet soda or the occasional pizza night to improve your overall health and longevity. In conclusion, there are a lot of great elements to the Bluezones diet. So my recommendation here is to start to slowly work in some of these changes. Start by cutting out full sugar soda, adding in more whole foods, and make an effort to spend more time moving and spending time with your loved ones. And while I agree with most components of the diet, I wish there was a bigger emphasis on protein intake, especially in relation to muscle mass. So if you or a client is considering trying it, I would put a bigger emphasis on that, as well as individualization around portion sizes. Now, as great as all those tips are, if you're really serious about starting a nutrition coaching business, the next thing I'm gonna have you do is check out this video I've linked up right here. Today we reviewed the popular Bluezones diet. Next up, we're gonna review the science of gut health. So make sure to check it out now, and I'll see you in the next video.